All right, everyone, welcome to New College. My name is Shadab Rahmatullah. I like good clothes and I wear many hats. You might know me as lecturer in Islamic Studies at the School of Divinity, but today I'm speaking to you as the Director of Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion at the school. And the school is delighted to be hosting Professor Aisha Chaudhry, henceforth Aisha, to have a conversation about her latest book, The Color of God, A Story of Family and Faith. The school is equally delighted to be co-hosting this session with two outstanding scholarly networks at the University of Edinburgh, Gender Ed and Race Ed. Launched in 2017, Gender Ed is an interdisciplinary network that brings together scholars working on women's studies, gender, and sexuality studies. And we're honored to be joined today by the network's director, Dr. Radhika Govinda, henceforth Radhika. Radhika is a senior lecturer in sociology, and her research interests lie in women's agency, gender politics, and knowledge production with a regional focus on South Asia. This session is also being supported by Race Ed. Launched in 2020, Race Ed is a cross-university network of scholars who work on race, racialization, and decolonial studies. Race Ed has teamed together with the Scottish Network for Religion and Culture to co-host a drinks reception in the Rainy Hall right after this session, and we'd like to thank the director of Race Ed, Dr. Katusha Bento, for her support and solidarity. I'd also like to give my personal thanks to the Book Festival director, Professor Alison Jack, and to Dr. Lewis Wilson McFarlane for all their support in organizing this event. And I'd like to give a big shout out of love to our student helpers, estate staff, and servitors for all their hard work in making this festival run so smoothly. Now, before introducing our esteemed guest, some housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded, so please turn off your phones. I will practice what I preach and turn this off. And in the case of a fire, you want to be heading that way. In the context of imminent incineration, that's the door that you want to go to, because that is the door that will get you out of New College. Just make sure that you go down the stairs and not up. Without further ado, let me introduce our esteemed guest. Professor Aisha Siddiqa Chaudhry is Canada Research Chair in Religion, Law, and Social Justice, and Professor of Islamic Studies and Gender Studies at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. She is a member of the College of the Royal Society of Canada. Aisha has held fellowships at the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation in Montreal and the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard University. In the field of Islamic studies, she is most well known for her seminal book, Domestic Violence and the Islamic Tradition, Ethics, Law, and the Muslim Discourse on Gender, published by Oxford University Press. Here at New College, I teach a course called God of the Oppressed, Liberation Theologies in Christianity and Islam, and my students love engaging this fantastic work. Aisha's current book project is a lyric biography of Aisha bint Abi Bakr, Prophet Muhammad's wife, and the book is tentatively titled The Little Red One. Please join me in welcoming Aisha to New College. Welcome to the University of Edinburgh.
Thank you very much for having me here and for that beautiful introduction.
Maybe we can start with the question of origins. How did this book come about? What inspired you to write this book?
Let me just sort of reiterate, thank you for having me here. I'm really grateful to be here, and it's good to be among friends and also around all of you. Thank you all for coming out this evening, and also, it's a really beautiful room, so I just want to say that. So what inspired me to write the book was, I was actually at that fellowship at Harvard in 2015-16, and when I went there to work on a different project, and it was a project on the Quran. And the first couple of weeks that I was there, the sun was out one day, and I didn't want to be inside looking at my computer. So I took a notebook and a pencil and a pen, and I went outside. I sat on the patio. The sun was streaming. I was in the sunlight. It was really beautiful, getting my vitamin D. And I just started writing, and I wrote Anguish, the first chapter of this book. And it was a really strange experience because I never intended to write this book. I never intended to write that piece. I was just like, I don't know, I just was moved to write it, and I wrote it. And then I was just like, what is this? And so I called my partner Rumi, who is in the audience and who at that time was at Stanford on a fellowship. So we were across the country from each other. And I said to him, you know, I wrote something, it's really weird, it's not anything like what I've written before, will you listen to it? And he was like, yeah, perfect timing, I'm taking a walk right now, it's great. So I read him a version of that chapter, what became the first chapter of the book. And he was like, he said, you know, I had to sit down while you were reading, that's like so unlike, like your voice is so different in this. It's just beautiful, like just keep writing was what he said. And so I just kept writing, and I filled 5 notebooks. I wrote the book entirely by hand. And so I filled 5 notebooks of writing, and you know, I was at this fellowship during this time. So one of the most beautiful things about a fellowship is that you get to sort of think about one thing at a time. So you're not thinking of committee meetings, and you're not teaching, you're just like able to sort of like think about writing. And you can sort of read again. And one of the things that happened on that fellowship also was that I reconnected with my love for reading. Because I grew up, I loved reading. When I went to grad school, I loved reading. And then at some point, I hated reading. And then I just like read as little as I read as little as I possibly could get away with for like a decade. And then once I got tenure, when, you know, this fellowship came right after tenure, I reconnected with my love for reading. And so I got to read some amazing works, and you know, I was writing, but I was reading beautiful stuff while I was writing. And I think that's an important part of that process. And I was also in fellowship with people who were, you know, there were poets, there were filmmakers, there were writers, like religious studies people, sociologists, philosophers, also scientists. So it was like a fellowship of 50 people. And people who I befriended, I was able to talk to them, and I was able to share some of my writing with them and get feedback from them. And it was really validating to have these people who were professional writers to be like, say to me, like, you're a writer, you have to keep writing. And I was like, yeah, I know I'm a writer, like I wrote a book. They're like, no, like this is different. This is different. Academic books, like in their minds, did not count as real writing. And so, which is what happened, by the way, when I eventually went to sell this book or pitch this book. Everybody called me a debut writer, even though I'd written the first book. But you know, it's because they were like, this is a new market, it's a new world. Like they didn't care that I'd written an academic book published by Oxford. Like they just didn't care about that. So, yeah. So that's how the book came to be, essentially. Like it was basically in a space of like, I had time to think, but it was also in a very communal kind of space where I was thinking, where I was like reading and writing and then reading with the people that were around me. And it was really, it was very like positively reinforcing. Yeah.
I'm sure folks here are really intrigued by the title of the book, The Color of God. Could you tell us a bit more about that and what it's meant to signify?
Yeah, so in the simplest terms, like the origins of that, the Arabic for that title is Sibghatullah. And Sibghatullah is, the phrase is from the Quran. There's a verse in the Quran that says, Sibghatullah wa man ahsanu min Allahi sibgha. The color of God, and what is more beautiful than the color of God? And I really like that verse. I always love that verse. And my nephew, my sister's son was named Sibghatullah. And when he was 4.5 years old, as for people who've read the book, he passed away unexpectedly. And the first chapter that I wrote is about him passing away, me learning about him passing away. And so in a way, like that's what the book is named after him. But I also really like that name because there's something completely there's something about the idea of the color of God that resists like fixing, like pinning down, or it's an unanswerable question in a way. Like, what is the color of God? It's an unanswerable question, and it sort of resists categorization. It resists being put into a box. It resists like any kind of an answer. It's sort of more mysterious and it opens you to more questions than it does to answers. And I feel like in the book, that's something that I'm trying to do as well, is sort of resisting sort of these simplistic categorizations and ways of putting people into neat little categories, and sort of understanding the world in this delineated way. And so I feel like it captures the ethic of the book as well in that way. Yeah, thank you.
I really love reading your book, and I've said this to you already, but I'm very happy to say that again and again. There's several passages in your book that I found really moving, really powerful. So I do hope that you will read one a little later in today's session. guess what I want to begin by saying is you share your academic insights through the story you narrate, the story of your family and yourself. And you write in this really accessible, what struck me is that you write in this really accessible, raw, intimate, empathetic style about really complex experiences. You write about embodied intersectionality, about how conservative Islam, coloniality, racism, gender and patriarchies, migration and feminism and knowledge making are deeply entangled. And it really feels like the best kind of theory.
Thank you.
Because you write about your personal experiences whilst also providing a critique, an academic critique, but in such an accessible, relatable way. And as a woman of color, academic from the Global South, now teaching gender and sexualities courses in this institution and a predominantly white university setting, I thought your writing really brings alive the theory that I want my students to read and be able to relate to. So thank you so much for writing this book.
Thank you so much.
And your style of writing really draws the reader in. It is as if you're in dialogue with your reader all along. And before introducing a passage in the book where you write about your family's involvement in a religious cult, you write, I ask you, dear reader, to please avoid simplistic, exotic, dehumanized conclusions from the story. Try to find yourself in it, you say. Look harder, you are here. And to me, that really seemed like, it felt like an invitation to explore how parts of the story you tell resonate with our own lived experiences, including our own stereotypes and prejudiced notions that we must confront and interrogate. And the way you did it, as I was saying, it felt like you were holding the reader's hand and taking them along through that journey. And at the end of the book, you write, and readers, it was fun imagining you as I wrote. So who is your imagined readership? Who was your imagined audience as you were writing that book? Because I really felt like I was in a conversation with you as a reader, but I want to know from your perspective who you were imagining to be your readership, and what was the message you were trying to communicate to them as you wrote.
Thank you. That's such a beautiful, rich, beautifully said question. So thank you so much for that. There's so many places I can go there with that. I appreciate that you read the acknowledgements where I talk about the reader. I thought about a lot about the acknowledgements. Yeah, and I thought a lot about the acknowledgements as well when I was writing them. So, one of the things that one of the audience members that I was thinking about was, I'll start with the beginning. So you were talking about this way of writing that I was doing. And I feel like, I'm so appreciative that you picked up on that, because I was trying to write a work, in my mind, this is a work of embodied theory, right? So it's like growing up, I went to undergrad, graduate school, and I read all of these academic texts, and I learned all of the things that I learned from them. But there was a kind of reaching that I had to do to learn them. And in that reaching, there was a kind of distance that was put between me and my family and all of the people that were in my life that were not in those classes and in those rooms with me. So there was both a learning and an alienation that was happening at the same time, and a distancing. And at some point, if any of you have parents who don't speak the same language, and even if you share a language, you might be able to talk to them about groceries or health or family drama in the language that they speak. I feel like in Urdu I can do all of those things. But if I try to talk to my mom about, if I try to talk to her about intersectionality, or if I try to talk to her about, these ideas like metaphysics, suddenly the conversation breaks down, because I don't have the vocabulary for it, and she doesn't. We just don't share a vocabulary. And so it can be really alienating to do that. And I also felt like there was something about, especially in Islamic studies, which is a religion that I was, born into. It was so deeply, I was sort of entangled with and embedded in this community. When I was learning about this stuff in in very white spaces, in this very technical language, where nobody in the communities that I was raised with would understand what was being said about them, that was like a very difficult thing to, it created a chasm that was very hard to bridge. And it didn't feel really good, actually. It felt sometimes it felt like betrayal. Sometimes it felt like I was learning to speak about my people from a kind of distance that was a lie, that didn't feel like genuine. And it also felt, and that's like something that I felt like, in the domestic violence book, I cared so much about the topic, but I had to like do this objectivity thing, and I felt like I was just pretending like I didn't care. And it felt disingenuous the entire time. So I felt like with this book, with my second book, I wanted to close that gap. Like I didn't want to, and we know this from the work of feminist theorists, but also especially women of color, Black feminist theorists, is that the embodied experience is a source of epistemology, and lived experience is where we get our knowledge from. And we always learn things and we know things from where we are and who we are. We can never actually separate ourselves. We're never in a vacuum. We're always in a, we're never in a social historical vacuum. We're always situated. And so no matter how much we pretend to be in a vacuum, like that doesn't become true by our pretending of it. And so I wanted to write from the place where I'm at. So if you'll notice, each of the chapters is based around a story, and the story makes a point, like it's making a theoretical point. There's no story in there that's like just for the sake of sharing the story. And I did that because I wanted to show like how I understood the thing, like the arguments that I was making from where I was. I wanted to show my reader that, and I want to invite my reader to think about whether they agree with me, disagree with me, and how is their lived experience different. And how does that lead them to disagree or agree with me, or sort of understand things in a different light? And so I was doing that. That was intentional. So thank you so much for picking up on that. I'm very grateful for that. I'm like, okay, maybe I didn't do such a bad job. And then in terms of audience, that was also a really big shift from my first book to the second book, I would say. When I don't know if any of you have learned this, but I remember a thing that was said to me many times when I was an undergrad at the University of Toronto was professors would say, write to a hostile, stupid, or I don't know there was a third thing, like write to this audience that is hostile, they're going to disagree with you, so you have to prove uninformed, ignorant, and so it's just like this person who's just so they invited us to imagine a person who had unkind eyes and who was not going to understand us, and that we had to express ourselves in ways that we would be understood to them. And it was just a terrible way of writing. It's a terrible, because then you come to the writing from a place of insecurity. You're already imagining all of the rebuttals. You're not coming from a place of joy or care or kindness. It sort of cuts you off from the kindness of your reader, and it cuts yourself off from being kind to your reader. I think it does both of those things. And so, so the people that I imagined reading this book, first and foremost, was a younger version of myself. So when I was I'd say 19, 20, I was very, what I would call a Puritan Muslim. I believed in the world being black and white. I had very clear ideas about everything. I thought I understood everything. And I really didn't. But I really believed I did. And I wanted that girl to read this book, and I wanted to bring her along. I care about her, I love her, and I want her to grow softer, and I want her to get comfortable with the gray. So that's a person I was thinking about. And then apart from that, I was thinking of young Muslims reading the book. I was thinking of young children of immigrants, people in diaspora. I was thinking of, I was just thinking of anyone who feels like they're looking for a home, they're looking for a sense of belonging, and they're trying to struggle with the violences that contains, any claim to belonging contains, and they're trying to negotiate that and think about where they find themselves. So I was thinking of a broad audience, but more importantly than anything, I was thinking of an audience who was kind. So an audience who was compassionate, an audience who was interested in what I was saying and was taking the time to pick up the book and read it. And so I wanted to be in conversation with them. I didn't want to alienate them. I didn't want to prove that I was right. I just wanted to share some thoughts and be what do you think about this? And how do you connect with this? And not get the final say. So, yeah.
It's interesting what you say about writing being an insecure process in a sense, which brings out your insecurities in a way, and that we often are encouraged as academics to think of the reader as somebody who doesn't know, and we have to inform them
Yes.
somehow. But the other part of the process of writing is also how it's, in that, it's also an individualized, isolated exercise. Whereas you were earlier on, you were speaking about writing as a process, as a communal experience for yourself. And in your own acknowledgements, again, going back to those, you write about how all books are created in community, and this book was especially nurtured, cultivated in community. You also practice radical vulnerability in how you write. So I'm wondering, did everything you wrote, when you wrote, you actually wrote it in your diary, did that make it into the book? And also, could you tell us a bit more about your writing and editing process?
Okay. Yeah, great questions.
Contrast.
Great questions. Let me remember all of them, but if I forget, please tell me. Well, the first thing is, I think I say that, all books are written in community, because I really resist the idea of the original idea. It's like we tell our students that, make sure your thesis is original. Well, no, it's never going to be original. None of us have ideas that come out of nowhere. We're not. We all are born into worlds full of ideas, and we learn from other people, and we build on other people's ideas all the time. We are never. I don't know if I believe that there is an original idea out there. I mean, I think we're always in conversation with people, and whether we are able to cite them or not, and there's a whole citation politics that's also interesting. But however it is that we are incorporate them into our work, intentionally or not, we are always being formed by the people around us, the things that happen, the conversations that we're part of. So I really, the idea of the solitary writer sitting in a cabin and just somehow they're producing these masterpieces that are just sort of unconnected to anything around them is something that I just find. I think I find it distasteful. So I find it a form of ingratitude, actually. And that's why I think I start the verse, the acknowledgements with these verses in the Quran that say that human beings transgress when they believe that they are independent. Because we're not. We're deeply, deeply entangled. And so for me, that was an important thing to acknowledge in the writing. The other thing that's interesting to me about, that I was thinking about the writing, Can you remind me what the second question was?
Yeah. So I was saying how you practice radical vulnerability in how you write. You're writing about really complex experiences and some really difficult experiences of your life. And as you do that, you're also, your life is entangled with other people's lives. And so are there things that you chose not to include in the final version?
Excellent.
And also, what was that process of writing? Because it's iterative, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. Okay, thank you so much for that. So, so another way that I wrote in community, so because it was so, I was writing first of all about a Muslim story, and I'm writing about a Muslim story in which I'm coming from a family that's very conservative, and they follow this form of Islam that I call Puritan Islam, and it's a very political issue. So it felt especially important to be in conversation with lots of people while I was doing that. So one of the things that I did was, I hosted a workshop. I got a grant to get a workshop where I invited Muslim women from different backgrounds, so professional class, students, people who weren't working, who were not part of the workforce, lawyers, professors, so people from different backgrounds to come together of different ethnicities and races, but all Muslim women, to come together, and we read the book and we talked about it for 3 days, and we sort of I kind of addressed all of their concerns, because I was I wanted to hear all of the concerns, because you can get so close to the text that you can't see it. You can't see the thing that somebody else might be that is so messed up, or that hurts my feelings, and I wanted it to be fundamentally a book of healing and care. And so it was very important for me that I wasn't intentionally hurting people when I was writing it. And so it was very helpful to get all of their feedback and to incorporate all of that into the writing. I also shared the book once it was in its closer to its final form with writers that I really admire, and there's a list of those people that I mentioned in the book. A lot of them were from the fellowship at Radcliffe, who got to read the final manuscript, and they gave me feedback about structure, about all kinds of things, about content. One of them was the book is not done, and I was it was done. I was the book is done. He was this last chapter, please water me, is not done. And I was kind of irritated because I was it's the longest chapter. I've thought about it a lot. It is done. And he was like, I'm gonna lean on you, like, about that. He's a writer, he's a poet, so I was just like, you know, it was so frustrating. But one of the things he did was in his comments, he had this, he had a misquote. It's Ross Gay, and he was misquoting Patrick Rizal, another poet. And the misquote is something like, the God of sorrow is the God of rage with both eyes torn out. It's such a beautiful, evocative quote. And I took that as like an anchor, and then I wrote this piece about sorrow that is now in the Please Water Me. That was not there. The book was about to go to press without that passage there. And that passage is like the heart of the whole book. Like, so it brought forth this like beautiful, and then when I went to look for Patrick Rizal's quote, it was like the wrong quote. Like Ross had misquoted him, but because he's also a poet, had misquoted him so beautifully that the misquote was like what got me to this place. So that's why I have it like listed there as the misquote. But so it was really important. Like, it really changed my book to be able to be in conversation with these different people throughout the book. And then I also just I have such generous and wonderful friends, because I would just go to people's houses for dinner when they invited me, or they would be at my house for dinner, and then I would be like, can I read to you? And they would be like, yes. And then they would just listen to me read to them. And so lucky, you know, such a lucky thing that they were so kind to me. And yeah, I mean, it was really important to, like, when you think you're doing something and then you see the audience and then they're like not feeling what you're feeling at all, or they're feeling something completely different, you're just like, oh my God, like, I need to fix this, or I need to make this better. So, am I taking too long to answer your questions?
No,
Okay.
not at all.
Okay, so then the last point was about what if I took anything out? I did. I took out, right before the book went to press, I took out 4 chapters. And it was like, I took them out because I felt like, you know, they weren't making the argument that I wanted them to make the way I felt like was the way I wanted to make it, that I could stand behind it. And I just didn't want to have anything in there that I felt even a little bit iffy about. So they weren't ready for the world, and so I didn't put them in there. And this book is 1.5 of those 5 notebooks that I wrote.
So there are more coming.
Well, I don't know what'll happen. Some of them are becoming part of this other book, the lyric biography. They're getting interwoven into it, and so it feels fun. Who knows what'll happen? Yeah, and they're all I haven't even transcribed them all, so they're all. And the transcribing is a really fun part of the editing process too, because you're writing it, and then when you're transcribing, you're just doing so much editing, and I really love it. It's really, really fun. Yeah, I mean, I feel like the first book, when I wrote it, it was so much suffering, and the second book was so much joy, because I was doing what I wanted, and I wasn't pretending to not care. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
I mean, what you said about social context and the fact that we're all the children of our context, that we cannot exist in a vacuum, that really resonates to me as a liberation theologian. And you spend an extensive amount of time in the book reflecting on your lived experiences growing up in a very conservative Muslim household in suburban Toronto. So I'd like to pick that out a bit and begin with the theme of migration. Your family migrated from Pakistan to Canada in the 1970s. It's not a context that was welcoming. The Canada of the 1970s was manifestly racist, and as migrants, they were alienated from Canada, but at the same time, they were also alienated from their beloved Pakistan. And there is a passage in your book that really struck me, quote, "The cruel fact of immigration is that once you leave, you never really have a home. You and the place you leave behind transform ceaselessly, infinitely, so that if you encounter each other, you are unrecognizable to one another," end quote. And so I wonder, what does home mean to you now? What does it mean to belong? And for you, are home and belonging territorialized notions?
You know, that's such a good question. And it's a question that sort of I think about a lot, about home. You know, I think one of the things that has happened with colonialism, with in the modern world, with transportation, planes and trains and cars, is that a lot of us have become completely alienated from the land that we're from, right? And you know, Karl Marx was talking about this. A lot of indigenous scholars talk about this, about the power and the importance of being from the land, being on the land that you're from. And so many of us actually cannot go back to the land that we are from. You know, my parents, they're from Pakistan, but as I say in the book too, they lived there for less than 20 years of their lives. My father was actually born in India, and then in 1947, with partition, they moved to Pakistan. And my mother was born in Pakistan, but her family had been displaced during partitioned just 5 years before she was born. So they, both grew up with stories of home being in India, a place that they would never ever be able to visit, and a place that I have not been able to visit as well. It's very hard to get visas to India if one of your parents is born in Pakistan. And so it feels like there's like a profound sorrow to me about that experience, that, we're cut off from the land that we're from. And it does not feel to me that if I'm born like in Canada, which I was, that like then I'm from Canada. It feels, I have tried to do that, and I feel like I find that to be really troubling for myself because because I'm just not from that land. I don't feel like this is not my land. It's not like my body when I'm in closer to South Asia, when I'm in Pakistan, like the way my body feels in warmer climates is very different than the way that it feels in northern climates. Like I'm just like, look at me, like I'm not from here. I'm not from the north, there is this way that, this new idea that we've come up with that feels like an old idea, but is very new, the idea of the nation state. And suddenly there's like this expectation that we are all meant to like sort of take these identities and make them our own. That just feels to me really troubling because, the nation state is built on so much violence, on so much genocide, on so much displacement. That if I want to claim belonging through that, I have to also inherit the legacies of all of that violence, which I claim by citizenship anyways. But it doesn't give me meaning. I don't want it to give me meaning in that same way. So I'm very interested in the question of all of the violences that our claims to belonging make necessary. And I feel like that's one of the things that I'm struggling with in the book is like where, when we make these claims of belonging, who are we displacing and who are we erasing and who are we hurting? And so I wonder, like one of the questions that I have, so I guess I'll just respond to what you're asking me with a question is like, what are ways of finding a sense of being without a home? Like what does it mean to be like, I'm not even looking for a home anymore? And I don't want to do that because it doesn't feel good, because it means that I'm participating in a more active way in the kind of displacement and erasure that I'm not interested in participating in. But also understanding like I can't go back to India, and that even if I did, it wouldn't be my home anymore. Like I'm not from there. It's like it would be it would be an identity that I would be just constructing in the same way that I would be constructing it if I was anywhere else. So it feels like maybe I'm not meant to, in a way I was thinking earlier, there's like, when we talk about belonging, like part of it is like being like, I want to say that I'm from this place. I want to feel like I belong to this. I don't want to feel like a feeling of separateness. I don't want there to be any questions about, like no one to ask me questions about this. And I feel like children deserve that feeling. But I feel like when you grow up, part of growing up is losing that feeling because you're like, oh, things are much more complicated than I thought they were. Or, I didn't understand that this, the state that I'm part of has this kind of history of violence that I didn't know about. I feel like part of growing up is losing that sense of belonging. So maybe we shouldn't be chasing it anymore. I don't know.
I mean, what you're saying really resonates with me. I mean, my background is the nation states of India, Uganda, the UK, and Canada. And I think I'm at a point where I've just given up on trying to find a home and trying to embed my sense of belonging in a praxis for social justice, for example, in a commitment to speaking truth to power. Do you feel that is something that do you think that can actually work, or is that too idealistic?
Well, I'm not going to say it's too idealistic, but I feel like we find belonging in community. What I'm hearing you say is that you're finding belonging in community with people with shared values. And I think that's a place that you can find a sense of community, and a community gives you a sense of belonging. It's much more ethereal, it's much more ephemeral, it's much more intangible, and it's much more in flux. There's no defined boundaries, and it keeps on changing because the people, your values keep on changing, hopefully, and the people you're in conversation with, they keep changing. And so, I like to think of for example, Muslim student associations, like MSAs. I don't know if you guys have them here, but
we call them Islamic Society.
Islamic societies. But if you see an Islamic society, every 4 years, they change, right? Because every 4 years, there's this new group of students who come in. And from every a snapshot over 5 years of one MSA or one Islamic society to another, 5 years, it's like it can be so dramatically different because the students are so different and they're looking for such different things. And I think those ephemeral spaces, like that's not a bad thing. It's like more like just love it now. Like love the place you're in now, and it won't last, and that's okay.
You mentioned values, and you grew up in a household that deeply, deeply valued Puritan Islam, and I found that phrasing really interesting. I always tell my students that if you use a certain language, you're not using another language. And I was just curious, why use that phrasing in particular, and what might you be trying to avoid?
Right. Well, I was trying to avoid extremist and fundamentalist. So I was like, and the reason I was trying to avoid those words were because they're full of so much political meaning that I don't associate with them. So like, growing up in this family where my parents were, we actually did call ourselves fundamentalists because like the leader that we followed, the cult leader, I do call him a cult leader because we joined his organization, gave an oath of allegiance, tithed money, he arranged marriages, etc. Not mine, but tried to. So we did so it was very much a cult, and he said we are fundamentalists, and the way we understood that was though that we went back to the fundamentals of Islam. So we didn't actually understand it as like the way it didn't have all the connotations that would come from outside, and I just didn't want to use terms where I did not agree or feel like growing up in this family and in this cult, I did not feel these political meanings attached. Like they just didn't feel real to me. So I was looking for a different word, and I settled on Puritanism because for a number of reasons. One is Puritanism is such a universal value. Like you can have Puritan of any kind of faith, and you can have Puritan of capitalist Puritans, you can have free market Puritans, you can have secular Puritans. Like Puritanism is sort of like you can have it around hygiene, which I talk about in the book. You can have it around all these ideas about like if you want things to be clear and delineated and you want a proper process and you want to be able to put people and things in neat categories, like that's like a tendency towards Puritanism. So it's sort of like a universal, I feel like it's a feeling that a lot of people can identify with. Also, writing in the context of North America, we sort of talk about the Puritans who came across the ocean, and it's a very positive association with that word, but Puritanism makes genocide very easy. And so I wanted to sort of think about that as well. And so Puritanism felt like the right word. And also, one of the things I do in the book is I'm thinking a lot about grief and death and mourning. And grief and death, it just resists any kind of Puritanism, right? Like grief is not it's not linear, there's no process, there's no pathway you can follow and steps that you can get through and then you're at the other end of it. It's messy, it's leaky, it's unwieldy, it resists any kind of order. And so I felt like that was more also a neat and beautiful way to think through those questions.
Now, your parents weren't always Puritans. When they came to Canada, they were trying to fit in, they were trying to assimilate. You talk about the bell-bottoms going on. I can relate to that. I see pictures of my family, they got the bell-bottoms going on. But Canada of the 1970s rejected them, and they faced a lot of racism. And it was at this point that they began to embrace, quote-unquote, Puritan Islam. Could you tell us a bit more about that transformation, and more specifically, why was the shift from racial identifiers to religious identifiers more empowering for your parents?
Right, great question. So, my parents were, they were trying to assimilate, and one of the things that they experienced when they came to Canada is the thing that a lot of people who come from places where there's a lot of brown and black people talk about when they come to a white dominant country, or white, where there's a predominance of white people, which is they suddenly realize I'm brown, or I'm black, or I have a race. Because growing up, they didn't feel like they had a race in the same way. Of course, if we're talking about the South Asian context, there's colorism. So there's there's a hierarchy of color. And my mother, for example, she's white, but she's not in Canada, she's brown, right? So what happens is suddenly there's a new hierarchy of color that gets mapped on. And so I just love that idea that my mother's just I'm white. And I'm you're not. You're really not, but she is. Her skin is white, and so it's race is a construct, and that's one of those beautiful moments where, in an embodied way, that gets completely disrupted. And so my parents realized they were brown, and it really sucked to be brown in a white country where people were just thought they were more inferior because of the color of their skin. And they had to sort of negotiate that from a pretty like from the lower rung of the social economic ladder as well. My father was a blue collar worker. So he was experiencing like a particular kind of racism as well. And they were feeling like kind of like, they were kind of floating, and they were feeling awful, and they were feeling like they were kind of unmoored. And my father happened to go to a Friday sermon one Friday. And this preacher there was the cult leader that I had referenced a little bit earlier. He's like this nationalist, post-colonial, Salafist thinker from Pakistan. And he sort of like gave this sermon where he talked about, that he talked about like how Muslims were important and special in world history, and they had an important role to play, and that Pakistanis in particular had an important role to play. So it was like even more specific in world history. And it made my father feel like he was part of something bigger, and that finally he could be proud of this identity that he had come to really be ashamed of. And he sort of like just, I think I talk about it like, it's like a kid catching a balloon and just flying off with it. Like he got so excited about this idea, and he kind of fell in love with it. And he joined it, and it, what it did was like, it allowed them now, like, I think like racism is a kind of persecution. And so instead of being persecuted for something they couldn't control about themselves, which was the color of their skin, they could like change the way they looked. So the way they dressed, the length of his beard. And then they could, when people would be awful to them, they would feel like it was because of something that they had decided to do about themselves. So they were like choosing the way that they looked. And in addition, of course, they were getting like sawab, so like brownie points for their persecution, because if you are a religious person and you are persecuted for your religious beliefs, then you are rewarded for that persecution. So you are collecting money in the sort of collecting points in your religious bank, however it is that's calculated. The angels are doing the calculating, right? So they felt, that they gave them a sense of control. Like I think I talk about it as a shield. Like it was their religious identity became a shield against the racism that they were experiencing. And I really do think that it worked for them in that way. So it was really powerful, and that's how I talk about that. Yeah.
Would you be comfortable framing that as almost conservative agency? They're exercising their agency, it's an act of defiance, but we have a very nice sense of what agency is. It ticks all the boxes, it's liberative, it's feminist, it's but this is agency, but it doesn't fit into the box that one would think of.
But maybe it's just agency, and we just express our agency in different ways. Some of us do it in this liberative way, like what we consider liberative, but for them, they were feeling like that was liberative. Like I would even call it that, you know what I mean? Like it doesn't even, I wonder if it even needs to be separated out. Like it's just doing the work that makes them feel freer. Yeah. And I think like it's important for me to tell that story because so often our conversations about radicalization are like, there's an external threat. These people from outside on the internet are like taking these people away. But like, usually as societies, we create the conditions to make that radicalism feel appealing. So like the place to look is at ourselves and not necessarily outside.
To find ourselves in the narrative.
Yes, that's right. Thank you. Brought that full circle.
So we talked about agency, and I could really get into it, but one of the things I want to draw out from there is also there is so much, and because you were mentioning feminism, so much of the, like in gender and sexuality studies classrooms, we talk about agency, and then we juxtapose that with the practice of whaling.
Yeah.
And you write about, you were speaking just a few moments ago about choosing how your parents chose how they dressed, and how, and you write in your book about how your mother and your sister wanted you to wear the niqab, and then wear the hijab. And so you write about niqab, hijab, and jilbab, and your experience in the Mediterranean about wearing the jilbab as well. And as I said before, you write, you don't shy away from writing about these experiences. And in the way that you write, including in the way that you recount your experiences of putting on or refusing to put on these pieces of clothing. And I wondered if you could share with us some of these experiences, but also the wider scripts of religious patriarchy, coloniality, and the white savior complex that these experiences belie.
Yeah, great question. Well, so I feel like we're sort of born into communities, and we have these scripts like that are sort of foisted on us. This is what a girl dresses like. This is what boys are like. This is like, are you in a society where like that accommodates non-gender binary people? Like, what is a script that's foisted upon you that's accessible to you or foisted upon you, depending on whether you're in that kind of a society or not? That's not the fire alarm, right?
No,
Yeah.
please be seated. Stay seated. It's all good.
What is that?
Library closing.
Oh, okay. I make a lot of noise for a library. Sorry. Okay, so it's so alarming. Anyway, sorry. Okay, so we're born into these scripts, and we're sort of told like, this is how you're a good person. This is how you're a good. This is what a professional person looks like. This is what a successful person looks like. We have all these scripts, and we try to follow them as best we can. But I think like the thing about the scripts is that they're always like necessarily simplistic, and because they're simplistic, they're always lies. Like you never fulfill a script properly. Like it never captures the fullness of your experience ever, no matter who you are. But there's an exchange for it. So the script becomes a shorthand. So you have a kind of community around it. So you're like, oh, I'm radical, or I'm conservative, or I'm, like this kind of a Muslim, or I'm this kind of a Christian, or I'm this kind of a Jew. And then you can have a community around that, And even if your experiences are not fully 100% fitting into the script, you can feel a sense of belonging. So like the script can be like sort of, what I'm saying is the script can give you a place, like a sense of belonging, but it can also be alienating. And if you break from a script, and I think I talk about this in the book, like when you break from a script, you can, it's hard to not fall just into another script, right? That's number one. And number two, when you break from a script, it can be a very lonely thing to do because you become unintelligible to the people around you, right? And so you become, so that can be really, that's one of the things that I was thinking about. Like it can be really troubling. And suddenly people are like, but wait a second. Like for example, like one of the things that when I was wearing hijab, like people would always say, or niqab, they would just be like surprised that I could speak English, or they would be like, oh sister, I'm so proud of you for, like I'm especially proud of you for where you are because you're wearing all of this stuff. And that was something I had to think about. Like if I take it off, then these same people are going to be disappointed, but then other people were proud of me. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's always like you're sort of, it's like a negotiation. Like, you're kind of, you're always sort of getting something and losing something, and we're sort of negotiating those things. I feel like there was a place that I wanted to take this, but I don't remember it. And I feel like Rumi does, but because I talked to him about it.
A really nice segue into the excerpt that you would read
Yes.
to us from your book.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, I will read it. So this is an excerpt. It's from it's like at the beginning of a chapter called Scripts. And both Shadab and Radhika were saying that this was like, this was the passage that they wanted me to read. Like they both happened to pick the same. Because I asked them, like, what are your favorite passages that I can
And we
read?
independently arrived at this passage.
That's right. So when people ask me why I wore niqab, and for those of you who may not know, niqab is a face veil, which I wore for 10 years, from grade 10 to the end of my master's. And a hijab is like something that covers your head, which I wore since I was 5. And then a jilbab is like a gown that you wear with that, so which I also wore. So when people ask me why I wore niqab or why I took it off, I rarely tell the truth. People are often not interested in the truth anyways. Usually they come to the conversation with ideas they're looking to confirm. Sort of like, was it hard to wear it? How hard was it? What's the worst thing that happened? It's a bad question, by the way, to ever ask somebody. What's the worst thing that happened? Don't you feel so free now? Thank God you live here, right? Or maybe, so how was it to take it off? Are your parents disappointed? Do you wish you had not taken it off? Do you struggle with shame for removing it? Or as one woman hosting a dinner party put it plainly, shame on you. These conversations, when they are conversations, can feel like a kind of non-consensual dance, where I learn what people want to hear and then try my best not to disappoint them and ruin the evening. I am a reluctant participant because this dance demands I tailor the truth of my experience to a garment that is too constricting. In doing so, I am forced to confront the truth of my experience, thank you, a truth that is painful, too difficult even to admit to myself, never mind share with strangers, and too complicated besides. That first day I put niqab on and looked at myself in the mirror before leaving for school, I saw fear. I was terrified of wearing niqab to school, terrified of other people's reactions to me, terrified of how they would make me feel. I knew people were going to be mean, and I was afraid of being the object of their cruelty, their fear, their insecurity. It's one of the scariest things I have ever done, wearing niqab in Canada. Every day, securing my niqab before leaving the house was like donning armor before going into battle, because I could be certain that there would be some confrontation every day, whether it was outright hateful, aggressive, angry behavior, passive-aggressive shit, I was in Canada after all, or just well-intentioned, offensive ignorance. The niqab evoked strong reactions in everyone I encountered. One question I was asked over and over and over again was whether my parents were forcing me to wear that. Immediately, I knew the correct answer. No, I choose to wear niqab, and my parents are supporting my decision. I was stuck between stereotypes of Muslim women as backward and oppressed and the misguided ideals of my parents. My mother, influenced by South Asian post-colonial Pakistani culture, as well as the Saudi-inflected Puritanism of the cult she had joined, believed that the more a woman covered, the more pious, pure, and Muslim she and her family were. The more invisible a woman, the better.